This video is for anyone who thinks that everyone who's ever heard a Taylor Swift song is going to hell.
Soundstripe.
What's up, people? Welcome back to another episode of Stars and Garters. I'm Katie Pettit, and welcome to the first random Serious Friday episode of the pod. Yes, that is the name we're going with, because one, I am not adding another day to be filmed, because no, I just do not want to do that at all. And I would have to make another little graphic thingy, and I am not creative enough for that. And three, I can just say that it's a random, serious Saturday, but still on a Friday, because any opportunity to make a Lego movie reference I will take. So, there you go. But yeah, random, serious Friday is what we are going with, and this is first one I'm doing. I am slightly nervous because this is, it's the first time I'm doing it. Obviously, it's going to be a serious topic, so there's a little bit more weight on it. It's actually less I don't want to say anything wrong, and more I just don't want to sound stupid, and I really hope this makes sense, because, I just wonder if all of my episodes make sense, honestly, because the outlines I make for these things are just like my brain vomiting words onto my laptop. But you guys watch it, so thank you, and I hope I don't sound too insane in these things. But also, this is kind of more of a forewarning for myself, because you guys can see the lengths when this is published, but I don't know how long this is going to go right now as I'm filming this. This has the potential to go pretty long, because it's a long outline. It is definitely the longest outline I have ever written. My gosh, it's longer than I remember. But that is a good thing. I'm glad about that, And I talked for 2 hours about Young Justice Season 4, so hopefully I feel like a bad Christian if this goes shorter than that, but just kidding. Kidding. It's okay to talk about stuff that you like for a long time, which is actually something we'll talk about on this episode. So, I'm just gonna stop stalling and we're just gonna jump into it. So, obviously, you've seen the title of this episode. We're going to be taking a look at a Christian perspective on pop culture. So, obviously, a lot of the things I talk about are pop culture stuff on this podcast. Okay, basically only pop culture stuff. And I really obviously enjoy everything that I talk about. I've made over 100 episodes just talking about my fandoms, and I love to do that, I'm very enthusiastic about them, and I really enjoy talking about them. But I'm also a Christian, and a lot of times, since pop culture is ultimately of the world, it can bring up some questions about how Christians should view it. And you see a lot of videos like this. And I just thought, firstly, because I've been thinking a lot about it myself, and secondly, because this is what I talk about on this podcast, that, this would be a good first Serious Friday episode. Also, because I hope that a lot of people who watch my podcast watch this episode, because I, again, just talk about a lot of fandoms, and I hope that, people watch this and see that I am also looking at all of these things from a Christian perspective. So I hope that clears that up in case anybody was worried. It doesn't seem like they are, but in case they were. And I was a little hesitant about doing this again because, this subject particularly is incredibly subjective. And I think that a lot of videos made on this subject that are already out there are not helpful, because they are videos that specifically support or are against specific types of media. Like, you see, should Christians watch horror movies, or can a Christian play video games type of videos. And I don't think those are helpful because of how subjective this is. However, in the case of not letting you know what kind of media I find okay, I'm kind of already out of that option, because entire podcast dedicated to fandoms again. And I'm literally wearing at least 3 pieces of merch right now. But I still think that I want to talk about this subject and address how Christians are to view these instead of just saying this is the wrong stuff to watch and this is the right stuff to watch, because that's ultimately up to you. That's why we have discernment and we have freedoms. So that is the type of video this is going to be. Because I'm not going to say, like, I, at no point in this video, at least I hope I didn't put that in there because I shouldn't have. I'm not going to say, don't watch this show or don't listen to this song, stuff like that. I have some personal examples of stuff I was convicted to not watch or listen to. But that is not me saying you cannot watch this. And then also, big disclaimer for my entire podcast, me talking about stuff that I enjoy is not something that's saying, hey, you should definitely go and watch this. Even if I would like recommend it and stuff, this is like, we're gonna talk about, like, you have to decide this for yourself, like completely for yourself. Not saying you shouldn't have anybody else's help, but don't take somebody saying you should not or you should to mean that that is exactly perfect for your spiritual health. So, all right, with all those disclaimers said, we're just gonna start off with bringing up some scripture that we should just have in mind always about these topics, because that's how you should think through everything, is through the lens of scripture always. So I'll just use this and give some scripture that we want to frame this topic with, and then I'll start talking about like the specific subsections of pop culture and the different kind of challenges that they might bring inside of them specifically. So, starting with scripture, 2 Corinthians 10:23 says, "All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up." So, how this relates to pop culture. For some Christians, it can be very tempting to be loose about the things we entertain ourselves with, because we know we have the freedom to choose what we want in that. Like I was just saying, it's our choice ultimately to discern what we can and can't entertain ourselves with. But just because we can watch or listen to something because it isn't directly sinful doesn't mean that it like is not going to harm you at all. Just because it's allowed and it's not a direct sin doesn't mean it is something that you should definitely go and do. We have to look at our thoughts and desires with painful honesty and not flippancy when it comes to choosing what we entertain ourselves with, and really think about if it could actually be hindering our spiritual growth or causing us to sin, because obviously stuff that isn't directly a sin can still lead to sin. That's pretty evident. Same chapter actually, but a little earlier. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete." So this means, same vein, every single thing that comes into your head should be viewed with a Christ-centered mindset and ultimately be to God's glory. That is the goal, that every single thought you would have coming into your mind would be something that glorifies God. So the basic principle for pop culture from this is to look closely at what the things you entertain yourself with are putting into your head. A very sneaky kind of sin can come from when watching certain things doesn't actually make you want to personally do that thing, but it makes you think those things are okay. That is a sin that I have realized exists recently, and it is not fun because it kind of takes a lot away from you. A personal example for me would be if I spend a lot of time watching a show with like a homosexual couple. I am often tempted to start to like them together and forget that that is a sin. That is a personal thing that I struggle with, and like I have no desire. I do not struggle with the desire of homosexuality, but when I see it, I kind of start to think, oh, hey, they're kind of good together or whatever, and forget that that is a sin because of when it's made to look so normal in those kinds of shows. So something like that, even if it doesn't make you want to go and do the sin that you're seeing, it can start to make you think that that sin is okay, and we should never think that anything God calls sin is an okay thing, because ultimately that's like sin does not stop at a thought. So even if it is not in the moment making you want to go do that sin, just starting with, hey, that's not completely bad, like will most likely lead to you wanting to do that sin. So when talking about temptations in this episode, I'll mostly be referring to temptations of thought, because you can obviously be tempted to sin in your words or actions. But it all starts with thought, because sin doesn't stop. It starts with you allowing a sinful thought into your head, and that just goes further and further if it is not cut off. So there's that one. Then Romans 14:12 says, "It is good not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble." So this is obviously similar in the same topic, but it's kind of a different vein. So not everybody struggles with the same sins. So remember that just because seeing or hearing a certain thing will not lead you to sin, it doesn't mean that nobody is going to be tempted by that thing. So knowing this, it just comes down to being understanding and not being annoyed or even mocking when somebody just can't handle certain things, and especially when them not being able to handle something means that you can't uh, entertain yourself with it around them. Just like not being annoyed or not mocking them, and just being respectful enough to choose a movie or a song or whatever that doesn't have those things in them out of respect for your brother or sister, because you don't want them to fall into sin. Um, so again, earlier in that same chapter, it's kind of the flip side of that principle that I just talked about, because Romans 14:3 says, "Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him." So this means for those who do choose to stay away from certain types of content, they don't get to say that everyone else should follow those standards. I've seen this. It's so interesting because I feel like the stuff that is usually addressed is not the stuff that I see people struggle with. This side of it, people wanting to say, like, no Christians can watch this, is what I have seen more of than people being flippant about it, which both are very valid sins that many people struggle with. I'm just saying I've personally seen more of the pride aspect of it and trying to impose your own personal discernments on other people. So, like, an example would be if you hear someone talking about a song that you know has, like, some bad language in it, and you choose not to listen to any songs with bad language, you don't need to go and, like, interject into that conversation and say you can't listen to that song. Of course, if they were to try to force you to listen to the song, you have every right to refuse. You just don't have the right to force them to stop listening to the song. And I also don't believe you have the right to, like, think less of them for listening to it. Just knowing that, I mean, the words here, because I didn't really want to say you don't have the right to judge them, because that just kind of sound like worldly ideology. But the words used in the Bible don't pass judgment on the one who eats or the ones who abstains. That's the words that the Bible uses. Obviously, I don't know translations and such, but it is, you are not to modify your thinking of that person if you know that they listen to those things. But you still, both principles apply. You're not supposed to pass judgment on those who do things that you don't find helpful for yourself, and you're not supposed to impose the things that you do not abstain from on somebody who does. Both apply, and you can do them both. There's not one that goes more than the other. So, with those verses in mind, and speaking of music, I will now go into those subsections that I was talking about, just the ways that different specific types of media can present unique temptations that don't necessarily come up in the other types of media. So, let's just go ahead and start with music. To be honest, this is a tricky one for me because I love to listen to music all of the time, and I'm still figuring out what I personally can and can't listen to and what is helpful for me. Um, it's also it's a tricky one for multiple reasons. One of them is that music is a very emotional thing. Sometimes it's not, but most of the time, for those who don't only listen to VeggieTale songs or whatever, music is a very emotion-driven thing, and it is very good at manipulating emotions. I don't think there's anything wrong with listening to a song that has the same emotion as you were, like, feeling right then, like listening to sad music when you're sad. But sometimes I think that listening to music that is sad or angry or angsty, uh, when you are not feeling that way, I think that if you look closely, it can sometimes cause you to feel that way. It might not, again, so subjective, but if you like are feeling kind of angry and like not just kind of grumpy on a certain day and you don't really have any real reason to, like maybe you were listening to some real angry music before, and there could be a correlation there. Again, I don't know, just something to look out for in music. And then also just uh it's just sneaky in a lot of ways. So as we saw in First Corinthians, everything comes back to what the music you listen to makes you think about. And music is probably the easiest way for media to affect your thoughts, because it is just so easy to let a curse word or an innuendo slip through your mind because you're humming along to the words of the song and you don't think about it. It's just going through your head, and that is part of the song, so you just let it slip. And neither of those things are things that you should be thinking about because that would be a sin. Having that thought would be a sin. Hearing the word or the innuendo is not the sin, it's the thought that is the sin. So, if a song is just so catchy, or the singer is incredibly talented, or the lyrics are deeply relatable to you, but you find yourself continually singing along, whether out loud or in your head, to that part that you know you shouldn't be thinking about, could be time to let that one go. Uh, this, again, just with it being so subjective, like on my top 10 vocally talented singers list, I had Ariana Grande, and a lot of her songs are not clean, and I choose to not listen to a lot of her music because of that, even though she is an incredibly talented person. So now, there's another part about being discerning in music that I haven't touched on yet because it's a lot more complicated and subjective, and it kind of goes along with what I was talking about. But that is the part of choosing not to listen to artists because of their lifestyles. That is a big thing that I see people talk about. That I don't think, like, it's interesting because worldly people don't think about this. I mean, they don't think about a lot of things at all, but just I didn't realize how like what a point of contention this was in Christian communities. It's a big Romans 14:3 thing because it does admittedly really get on my nerves when I happen to put on a song that in and of itself is like fine and doesn't have anything, like no cursing, no innuendos, no nothing, and it's just a plain old happy song, and somebody around me is like, she supports homosexuality, right? And it's just like, first of all, of course she does. It's really sad, but like everybody does. But more importantly, like I don't see how you are helping me in telling me that. like, but on the other hand, uh, if it would cause somebody to think that I support that everything a particular artist supports, I would still choose not to play the songs by that artist around that person in respect to their conventions. So, conventions? That's not a word. Yes, it is, but it's not the right word. I mean, convictions. Uh, but it's just, it is kind of a balance to find because it depends on how the person goes about it. For the person who is convicted of those things, I would just like for you to be able to do this. Like, hey, can we not play those songs around me? This is causing me to stumble when I've more been approached by, she supports homosexuality, right? I mean, you're basically supporting that by listening to her. Like, you guys, if you have a lot more convictions than other people, just please don't have a prideful attitude about it, because that's kind of sin too. Um, but like a personal example of a song that I have been convicted of about listening to is the song Timber by Kesha and Pitbull. So if you don't know what the song is, which I feel like most of you, even the sheltered ones, have at least heard it somewhere, uh, it is a 2010 song. It's I'm gonna party all night and I have 50 girlfriends and then Pitbull starts rapping. That is the song. I'm not saying that no Christian should ever listen to temper. Like, that is, again, not the point of this. But when I was listening to it, it has a verse that is clearly sexual in nature. And it was listening to that song was making me have wrong ideas about sex. So I stopped listening to that because I didn't want to think those thoughts. I was having certain thoughts and not wanting those thoughts, you know? And I saw that not listening to the song made me not have those thoughts. So, you know, I decided to get rid of that, even though it was really catchy and it sounded super cool and stuff like that. It just was not helpful, it was detrimental, and I just saw that and I removed it from my playlist. So, in the end, music can be very, very subtle. It's a real, real tricky one. So, first of all, know the meaning of what you're listening to. That can be a rough one as well. Like, just because the amount of innuendos in music is ridiculous and insane. Uh, and just like, why are so many things innuendos now? Like, it's so hard to tell, and you can just find out that songs you listen to that seem completely innocent are just like a complete innuendo, and it's terrible. So it is helpful to know what you're listening to, because listening is often accompanied by singing along again, and you could just be saying something really dirty and not good and just genuinely not know it, but it's still not a good thing. So know what you're listening to and take just a close look at how it affects your daily life and your thinking, especially when you're listening to it, but also how it affects you after you've listened to it or when you've been listening to it for a while. Just being very honest about where your thoughts have been going and if they are glorifying to God or not. And then if you. Okay, I don't know if I want to get that specific, but you have all these things that I just said, and they're true. And then you do have the freedom to discern what does and doesn't cause you to stumble. Just keep that in mind and be very honest. So, yeah. Okay, so the next thing I will talk about will be movies and TV. This is a tough one. they're all tough ones. This is a tough subject. But unlike music, which just tells you about stuff, uh, except for music videos, which I just personally don't look at those at all. But it's still different. Because movies and TV like show you the stuff and just like present it to you like right in front of your eyes. Like not uh I don't know what the word is, but it's very different from like a music video. It's part of a story and stuff like that. So just to get this out of the way, any kind of sex scene, watching that objectively wrong, no exceptions. Like that's very clear in the Bible. You cannot watch that and not sin unless, in the wise words of Pastor Gabe Hughes, you are a carrot. If that does not affect you, then you are a carrot, and you are not affected by anything because you don't have human feelings. So yeah, can't watch that at all. But then there's everything else that is subjective, which is so fun, and so easy to talk about. So the language or innuendo that can be found in TV and movies has the same general rules as music. Just be honest about whether or not a certain quote or a certain joke might have you thinking thoughts that aren't glorifying to God. I will say, however, with on that similar vein, movies and TV do present the unique temptation that doesn't often show up in music of making you think that perhaps like swearing or sexual sin is funny because those are, music is not usually made for like funny purposes. I mean, obviously there's comedic songs, but like usually most people don't listen to it for that purpose. But movies and TV, there's an entire genre that's comedy, and so many things like that are passed off as comedy. So make sure that you aren't falling into thinking that these things are, maybe they're not okay, but they're also not funny. Sin's not funny, and it is a difficult thing to discern again, uh, because like honestly, I feel like that a lot of things that we tend to laugh at just as like humans are things that we could like literally, it's like a razor thin line that we could also like just cry at. I don't know, that might be dark or something, but like it's a really hard thing to define, like just why you're laughing at something. Um, but it's just about being honest with yourself. If you are starting to think that swearing is the hardest one, for me personally, at least. Just like thinking that a certain word is funny, uh, and it's hard to tell when you are like not laughing at the joke, but you're laughing at the actual word. It's a difficult thing to tell. But again, it's just about being honest and thinking about like what am I actually finding funny in this, which can be again a very hard thing to determine. But just like, are you thinking sin is funny? That's it all comes down to that. It's a lot more complicated than that sounds, but the root of what you need to be getting to is, do you think this sin is funny? Which you should not. And if you do, there might be some things that need to be cut out. But completely, well, again, not completely unique, but much more unique to TVs and movies, we had this added category of violence. Not that songs can't talk about violence. There's a whole world out there that I have caught a very faint glimpse of like violent songs, and it is disturbing. But visual violence is very different than just hearing about violence happening. So, honestly, I am still at like the very beginning of discerning this part of this category of entertainment, and because like I freaking love a good fight scene. I'm trying to figure out if I should. Um, but one thing is clear. It might sound funny to most of you, but some people genuinely struggle with this. If seeing violence makes you want to go out and do violent things, it would probably be best to avoid that. And that's a real thing that people struggle with. And I think that a lot of Christians don't think about that as a struggle. But I've set aside a point to talk about that later. So, but yeah, if that is a temptation that gives you, then it would be best to avoid seeing things like that. But the point is the same with TV movies. Just take a long, hard look to see if what you're watching is making you think things that you shouldn't, think things are okay, think things are funny, that are sin, are clearly sin in the Bible. Because with all the subjectiveness, the Bible is very, very clear about things that are sin. It does not uh, it doesn't dance around those points. It tells you what things are sin when, like, God says things are sin. He does not dance around it at all. He calls stuff sin. Um, and so we know that, and even though this is very subjective, that is something that we do know objectively for sure. So you do have these guidelines. So just trying to get that through. Just look at you know how you are thinking about sin, and if you're thinking rightly about sin, and if you are having thoughts that glorify God. All right, so the next category is video games. Alrighty, you guys know, if you've been listening to this podcast for like any amount of time, kind of, video games are like one of my favorite things in general. I love video games. They're just they're great. Love them. But obviously they still come with temptations, and so I'm going to address them. I'm gonna go ahead and just be blunt about this part. I mean, I've already been blunt, so I guess I don't really have to. Guess it's a little late to add this disclaimer. But the most unique temptation that I have seen with video games, I think, comes from hypersexualized, mostly female characters. So I know that guys are usually more into gaming than girls, and guess what? Game developers know that too. Because the only game that I have played, the only game I own that doesn't feature a barely clothed female character is Stray. And that's about a cat and robots, which is so sad. But you know what? If they could hypersexualize robots, I'm sure they would. But luckily, right now, they do not. In this specific game, I'm sure they before. So, guys, I can't speak for you, but you know what is sin sexually and what is not. Uh, but and you know what you do and don't struggle with. So be on your guard. It is hard. It's like very very hard. Part to like you basically can't get around it. I've seen games where it's like the higher you level up this character, the more clothes you get to take off, or like something like that. And it's just like it's wild sometimes. And like this is where you can see that the world just like doesn't care at all. And we should care. So this is something you really, really gotta watch out for. I absolutely believe the guys have it way worse, but us girls who like to play video games cannot let our guards down either. Um, I I don't usually see a video game where some male character is not just shirtless, and it's it's a little bit harder for me to talk about this because that is not a sin. This is not a category of sins that I personally struggle with. But like yeah, everybody's shirtless. My favorite video game of all time, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like I could see Reyno's really deep V taking some girls' minds where they shouldn't go, for example. But just it's nobody is safe, unfortunately. So that is something you have to really look out for. And if you struggle with this, you're gonna have a hard time, and it's gonna suck sometimes. But you have to be discerning and honest. Um, and just know what you struggle with and not try to get around it because it's sin is quite persistent and it's not something you can really skirt around easily. And then aside from that, there's another unique thing. There's something interesting that comes from the fact that games, unlike movies and TV, there's rarely a game that doesn't have you actively doing something violent yourself, so not just viewing it but going and doing it. Yes, obviously it's not real. I'm not trying, this is not me being a nerd, but like you still are partaking in the violence in a sense, even though it's not real. You just have to be very careful that you don't become desensitized and start thinking that things that God calls sin are kind of cool. I think that is more of the temptation that comes from games, just like thinking it's kind of cool to go and be violent. And I think here I can go a little bit more in depth about what I said before about violence TV and movies, because of the fact that you are actively participating in the violence in games. So struggling with violence, like having violent tendencies or just liking violence, I feel like it is a very hard sin to deal with, and I don't think that many Christians get that. Because like it might be harder in a sense to talk about struggling with violence than say sexual sins or something like that, because struggling with violence is just seen as not normal. Like most people just think, oh, that's something a crazy person thinks. So it can be very hard to discuss that struggle with somebody else because most people you're gonna go to with that are like probably gonna look at you like you're a whole different kind of crazy. So that is quite difficult. And so with this one, it's very hard to say unless you do have a trusted Christian friend that you know isn't going to dismiss you as crazy for struggling with this and actually help you in this struggle. If you do have one of those, is there somewhere I can go get one of those? But if not, the only thing I can definitely tell you is that you can pray, which I know can sound redundant sometimes, and it's just not the same as talking to another person. But with God, I mean, obviously God is like better than other people. It's not the same, but He is better. And with God, He already knows that you're a messed up little weirdo. So, and He'll still listen to you anyway. So that's pretty incredible, honestly. So you can always pray and you can always read your Bible, and that is where you can like get all the like the ultimate source of truth. That's where that comes from, and it sounds redundant, and it's what everybody tells you for everything, but it is what you should go to in everything. And it's redundant, and people say it a lot because it's very important, and it's what you should do as a Christian. It's like God has given you these resources, and you should go and use it, even if though it doesn't feel the same as talking one on one with a person. And it can be very hard, especially if you're like a social person or just like really feel like you need to tell somebody this. Um, because it just that can make it very hard, but sometimes you just it's like your options with this one are somebody's gonna think you're crazy and not have a lot of helpful things to say about this, or you can pray, and even though you're not getting a direct conversation in the same sense, God will listen, and God has the power to change your heart and lead you in this, and you have the Holy Spirit, so it might not feel as effective, but it is, and you just have to trust. If you don't have those tangible resources, you just have to trust that like God is gonna work in you in this, since you don't have those resources, because He doesn't need them to work in you, and that can be very hard to trust. But that's just what you got to do in that kind of situation. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of a unique thing that I think can come from video games. But again, in general, where are your thoughts going? Are they glorifying to God? That's where it all comes back to. Are you thinking sin is okay? Are you wanting to go do sin? Are you becoming desensitized to certain sins? Just being very, 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 very honest about that, which is so hard. And you have to give up some stuff that is super funny or super cool or like all of these things. And sometimes you just have to get rid of those, and it sucks, but it is ultimately helpful. And it's just some people are going to have to give up more than others, and that can have another layer of difficulty to it. Just interacting with people who have different levels of discernment and conviction than you can be difficult, but just thinking about temptation in a biblical way will help you be able to interact with them, and just setting aside your own pride and lifting up the needs of your brothers and sisters will help you in that, even though it's like it'll help you. It's not going to make it easy. It'll make it a little bit less hard, and it'll make it more clear what is the right thing to do. Um, Not necessarily more easy, but you have that at least. All right, so those are kind of the big sections of pop culture that I wanted to talk about. A quick note about all the things I just said. Music is a little different. Nobody really thinks of music this way, but just a quick note about hobbies that you may have, because I just talked about TV, movie, and video movie movies and video games. And something that people who do enjoy those things should be aware of is the sin of laziness, and making sure they don't neglect their responsibilities for these comforts. However, I think that most Christians know and are aware of that sin, and I think that the other side of that issue is rarely talked about. So, and I think about it a lot. So, allow me to talk about it. For those Christians who aren't into screen based entertainment, which is fine, like, who cares what your hobby is? Like, whatever. But, like, for those of you who aren't into that kind of stuff, oh my gosh, please don't think you're better than those who are. I don't know if this is my neuroticism, but I just feel like people think if they don't like screens, especially if they're into sports, oh my gosh, they just think they're like, this is like, my hobby's better. Like, you're lazy and I'm cool because this is my hobby. So That's actually sin too. It's this stupid little dude named Pride, and it is a sin. It's wrong. Um, don't ever think that your hobby is objectively better than someone else's just because it doesn't involve a screen, unless the other hobby is like murder or something objectively sinful. Then yes, obviously your hobby would be better. But just don't be stuck up and prideful, because that's not even, it is a big personal like pet peeve, I guess, but it is also a sin. Like it is wrong. So just don't be stuck up. Some people play sports, some people like movies, and both can be genuinely enjoyed to the glory of the Lord, and both can be turned into sin. So please, just get off your high horse and stop thinking that liking video games makes you lazy. Because ultimately, your hobby and what you enjoy doing does not tell you that much about a person, especially if you don't know them. Just like see what kind of person that person is and not be like, oh, they like playing sports, they must be great at doing things and be super on top of all their responsibilities, and see somebody who enjoys TV shows and be like, ah, they must be lazy and eat Doritos every day for every meal. Like, just don't, please don't think like that. I think that I've seen way more of that, honestly, again, than the laziness thing. Just like, realize that any hobby can be turned to sin. Like, it's not just the ones that are like, can be turned into like laziness. If you genuinely enjoy TV, movies, or gaming, or something like that, if that is like you genuinely are engaged and enjoy that, and you get your responsibilities done, and you are able to get up from that and go like work or do something that you need to do, then enjoy it to the glory of the Lord. It's literally the same as every hobby. Get up and enjoy it to the glory of the Lord. And if you can't walk away from a sport or some other hobby that is better than those other things, that's sin too. Like if you can't walk away from that to do like work, or it becomes an idol, that's sin too. So just that's a big personal thing for me that I don't see talked about a lot. So keep that in mind. Thank you. I glad I could talk about that. So please keep that in mind. And thank you if you do. Um so yeah. All right, so I've talked about the different subsections and then just having these hobbies in general. But I feel like when you hear the phrase pop culture, I feel like the first thing that most people think about um, is like celebrities and like the lives of celebrities and being into that stuff. That is what the people who have called me a pop culture addict were thinking of, and I'm not really into that much, but that is just what people think about when you say the phrase pop culture, I think. So I think that I should address that in a video about pop culture. So the actual, and some like Christians are into that and like knowing about those things. So I have seen a little bit of it, not particularly one of the ones that I'm tempted to really get into. Um, but I have seen some of it, and like the actual lives of the celebrities, that part of pop culture is actually a really sad place when you get into it from a Christian perspective. Uh, and it's difficult. It's again, it's all difficult. But what I've seen is a lot of Christians, more than like much more than those who want to idolize celebrities, is the people who shun like famous people and talk about them as if they aren't humans, as if they're like these creatures who are only capable of bad things that people should only talk about as if they were crazy, and they should have them in that light. And I don't think that's the right way to look at things biblically, because celebrities are real people who are usually famous because of a real God-given talent. Like I know most, like a lot of Christians don't want to admit that, but like it's like even if they're secular, they're usually talented. They probably wouldn't be famous if they were. I mean, in the era of like famous YouTubers. Maybe maybe they're not famous because of talent, but a lot of the time they are. Like they're genuinely a gifted singer, or they genuinely are like know how to make people laugh, or they're genuinely talented in acting, stuff like that. Um, so they're like real people with real God given talent. And that's the thing that often makes me enjoy, like, that's a big part of that I enjoy of movies and TV is seeing a person genuine, whew, genuinely being talented and like creating something. Because that's something that God has given them the ability to do. Which does make it all the more sad when you see how they don't use those things to God's glory. So viewing in the subject of thinking about celebrities rightly, we've already talked about the things they produced in everything that I said previously, but them specifically, just their lives and knowing about that. I think a big thing that people don't think about is like you know you can like pray for celebrities, right? I don't think people think about that a lot. I sure didn't until like my dad talked about it. Just because I was seeing like even just the headlines of articles about them can like make you really sad just hearing about the things that they get into, often at such a young age. Just it's so sad. And I was like, oh, okay, like I can pray for these people. I want to pray for these people. I mean, like, I know, like, God, I pray for Ryan Reynolds. It might feel a little weird, like, the first time you do it. But for me personally, it is very helpful because I'm, like, so saddened by these things. They're just, like, exposed to, and just because of their fame and, like, just again, just, like, so young, like, it's crazy that I do want to pray for them because I just see the like lack of hope in their lives and just like the giant god-shaped void that is in their life that you can see so clearly. So I do like want to pray for them. And I'm not telling you that you need to pray like for every actor, singer you've watched or heard each day at the end of each day, but like that's it's just how you view these people, you know? Just viewing them in a biblical light as real people, which does include, I will say, on the flip side, not being obsessed with them and not uh, elevating them to more than a human and, you know, following them obsessively, agreeing with everything they say, that kind of thing. Obsessively Googling is insert celebrity name here a Christian in hopes that you will find a snippet of an article that says, hey, she might be, probably is not. Sorry. Um, but just both sides can dip into sin. So the shunning them is more of what I've seen, but I do know that uh, idolizing them is still a very real possibility. So if that is what you struggle with, that is how you need to look at that. Just they are still people and not God, but also not less than people. So yeah, those are the subsections that I wanted to talk about. So, in conclusion, God gave people the ability to create in so many different ways, and He's also given us, blessed us with the ability to enjoy what other people created. However, sin wants to corrupt everything that God made for good, and that does definitely show up in popular culture. So we must always have our guard up and be very honest with ourselves about how what we listen to, watch, or play is causing us to dwell on. Okay, so that was all I have on my outline. Again, it is a very, I feel like I could say a lot more. There's a lot of it just buzzing around in my brain that I don't know how to like get out and say to you guys in words that make sense. So, there's a lot of subtopics that could be gone into, but just I hope that this was helpful, just as a general frame of mind to have when dealing with these things. And it's for myself a lot as well, just having this view of pop culture because it's not something that most Christians like completely avoid. Like most of us watch TV and stuff like that. So you know, it's just different for every person and it's very subjective, but there is these general guidelines that we have. So I do hope that this was helpful and that maybe you learned something or whatever. But I'm glad that I did this, and I think it went well. How do you guys think this went for the first random serious Friday? Because like I mean, I'll probably do more of them, whether this is well received or not, because they just help me think through these things a lot. Um, Especially since they're just a lot to think about. Um, so I'll probably do more of these anyway. But do you guys think this was helpful? Do you think I said something wrong? If you think I said something wrong, please let me know. And why? And Bible verses, specifically. Show why. Uh, but like, if this is helpful or whatever, just let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Make sure to share and follow and subscribe and do all the stuff that you know you're supposed to do. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching or listening. Bye.